Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is John. I am the event coordinator here at Murder by the Book in Houston. And I'm super excited for tonight's event. But before we bring Elle out, I'm going to make a couple just general announcement things, let everybody know what's going on with us at the store. We have slowly started doing a handful of in-store events again. So if you have not come out for in a minute, check out the store's website, murderbooks.com. The event calendar will list events either as in-store or as virtual, so that we'll know which way things are going. For the rest of this week, we have Eva, I don't know how to say her name yet because I have not had a chance to chat with her. Eva Jurchix is going to be chatting with us on Thursday. On Friday, I'm going to be chatting with Juno Black, who is a pair of booksellers who have written this little cozy mystery that's been compared to Richard's scary kind of Murder, She Wrote. It's about a group of woodland animals that live in this small town and solve mysteries. And then on Saturday, we're going to have Kendara Blake actually signing in store at 2 to sign her new book, In Every Generation, which is a new Buffy book. The following week, we're going to have Kristen Bird signing with us. She's got a great domestic suspense that comes that's set in Galveston. Greg Hurwitz is going to be signing at the store on Wednesday next week. And then next Saturday on the 12th, Michelle Hillen Klump is going to be signing her book, A Dash of Death, at the store. And it is a really great cozy mystery that's set in Houston. The main character is a former newspaper reporter who is trying to start her own kind of craft cocktail business. So hopefully you guys will check those out. If any of those sound good and you can't make it, you can always order signed copies of those on the website, murderbooks.com. And if you have not gotten your signed copy of Finlay Donovan Knocks, Dead, we have them in store. They just arrived in the last couple of days. So if you haven't pre-ordered one yet, I have dropped a link in the comments there that has some more info about those. And if you have questions while Elle and I are chatting this evening, please post those in the live chat on YouTube or the comments on Facebook, and we will definitely leave time to get to those. It can be questions about this book, the previous book, her young adult books, writing process, any of that stuff. So if you have any of those, start thinking of those questions now. I think that's it announcement-wise. So I'm going to get Elle out here and get us started. How are you tonight, Elle?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be back.
Congratulations on the new book. Happy Pub Day.
Thank you. It's been a great day. I've heard from so many Finley fans today. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. So as anybody who follows us knows, Finlay Donovan is Killing It was one of our favorite books last year. We were lucky enough that Elle signed copies for us last year as well. And it was, I'm pulling up the list because I want to get the number right. It was one of our, that's the current. It was one of our best-selling hardcovers of last year. And I want to say it was pretty high up in the list because it was a huge staff favorite. Both myself, McKenna, Rebecca, we all loved it. Yeah, it was our third best-selling hardcover of last year.
Wow.
And we're so excited that the first one's out in paperback now, too, because as I was telling Elle before we started, it's the perfect book for people who aren't sure kind of what they're in the mood for. They just want something fun. And so we're super excited about it. And we're so excited about the new one, Finlay Donovan Knocks, Dead, which just came out today. So officially, Elle Cosimano is the award-winning author of several acclaimed young adult novels, including Nearly Gone, Holding Smoke, The Suffering Tree, and Seasons of the Storm. Her debut, Nearly Gone, was an Edgar Award finalist and the winner of the International Thriller Writers Award and the Mathical Book Prize, recognizing mathematics and children's literature. Her more recent young adult thriller, Holding Smoke, was an International Thriller Writers Award nominee and a Bram Stoker Award finalist. In addition to her novels, her essays have appeared in HuffPost and Time, and she lives in Virginia with her husband and 2 sons. So to get us started, for anybody who is out there watching and might not know who Finlay Donovan is, can you tell everybody a little bit about her as a character and kind of what she's up to in this new adventure?
Sure. Finley Donovan is, she is a struggling single mother of 2 young children and a romantic suspense novelist who has not had the most successful career to this point. And she is in the middle of what is about to become a horrible custody battle with her ex-husband, who has left her for their real estate agent. So Finley is really, as a heroine, very down on her luck when we first meet her. And this is a fun, rompy book that doesn't take itself too seriously. It is what I would probably call a dark comedy. So it is really the story of Finley, who is overheard having lunch with her agent at Panera discussing the plot of a long overdue manuscript that happens to involve murder when she's overheard by a woman seated at the table beside them who misinterprets the conversation and assumes that Finley is a killer for hire and decides that Finley will be the perfect person to handle this woman's problem husband. So she offers Finley an irresistible sum of money if she will do away with this man. And it puts Finley in quite a predicament. She has to decide how badly she needs that money and exactly how close she's willing to go into that role in order to save her family. And so this is where we first meet her in book one. And it proceeds to be a comedy of errors as she is sort of thrown into the life of a hit mom. And in book two, we sort of pick up right where the end of the series opener ends.
Perfect. So in the first book, I read, Finley has a really great sidekick named Vero, who kind of starts out as the nanny. But I read that initially you had only intended to have her around for a couple of scenes, and then she just kind of took on a life of her own. Can you tell everybody a little about her character too?
Yeah, absolutely. When I first started writing the story, I had a loose idea of where I was going with this premise. And so I knew the basic setup of the story, and I had kind of a rough outline, but I didn't have anything too concrete. I knew that there is a sort of a pivotal scene in the book where Finley has to make an important decision about, what she's going to do with a body, and she is alone in the situation. I knew I had to complicate. I mean, my job as the writer, and especially as a thriller and a mystery writer, is make things as difficult as possible for my characters. And so I knew at this particular scene that I needed to complicate things in a really horrific way for her. And I thought really what we needed to do was have somebody walk in the middle of this crime. And I thought, well, who better than her children's nanny? And I thought that really in putting them in the scene together, it would be an obstacle that Finley would have to overcome. And I didn't realize until I was in scene and writing these characters' voices how beautifully they would complement each other on the page. They have this fantastic symbiotic kind of relationship that's developed and still developing through the series. They are so different in so many respects. They're at different points of their lives. They have very different personalities. They have very different talents. And yet together on the page, their chemistry was undeniable. And I had so much fun writing this scene between the two of them. And at that point, I knew that Vero was not only going to become a really important part of this first book, but that she was going to become kind of a pivotal character for the series. And that's really when I started having fun writing this book, is when the two of them were together, and I started to see that this was going to become the heart of the story. These two women sort of lifting up each other and pushing each other out of their comfort zones and doing some, getting involved in some crazy situations together and sticking together through it. And that's really, I think, if you were to boil down Finley Donovan, that's really the heart of the story, is this relationship between these two women.
Yeah, I've seen several reviews that have kind of compared them to kind of Lucy and Ethel, and that's kind of perfect because they are. And one of the things I love about the books is one of the things that we compare them to is when people are looking for Janet Ivanovich, which we love Janet, but sometimes those books can be kind of a little over the top. And I love that yours, some of Janet's can be kind of really over the top, but I think that yours, they're over the top, but they're not quite as much, and it's just enough that they're still like believable, that you could find these people in these situations where this woman is mistaken for a hitman, and it's like, okay, let's see what this is gonna do. Let's see if I can do this.
I am a huge Janet Ivanovich fan. The Stephanie Plum books were a lifesaver for me, especially as a young mother, when my kids were little and I just needed the joy of escaping into a really, really fun story. And I discovered those books, when my children were infants. But, so I love, and this kind of falls into the same spirit of those
Mhm.
books. It's
Yeah.
fun, it's rompy, there's a mystery at its heart.
Mhm.
It never really takes itself too seriously. But for me, it was also really, really important that I ground the reader in very real characters. And for me, it was really important that that character be a mom.
Mhm.
And so I think I sort of try to find the balance. We do, especially book two is bananas. It's absolutely bonkers. It is so much fun. But I really try to stay grounded in some of the real day-to-day struggles of womanhood and motherhood and rediscovering yourself in the middle of your life and trying to figure out who you are and who you want to be, so that we're also at the same time sort of, while we're having all this fun with all this silliness, we're also touching on some very real themes and coming back to those as sort of a touchstone in the story. And so I think even though we do sort of go off the rails at some points, what always grounds us to the ride is Finley and kind of who she is and who she's becoming. And that was really important to me when I was putting the books together.
One of the things that I love, especially about the first book, is they're also this really fun kind of meta, kind of um, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but there's this, the idea that authors are always getting asked kind of where do your ideas come from, and so it's this kind of really fun meditation on kind of these weird places where authors get their ideas from. So since Finley is a writer, how similar is her writing process to yours?
Wow. The maybe not the process, but our
Mhm.
lives and our schedules in terms of like when we write and when we find time to write tend to be really similar. I'm a night writer, kind of like Finley is stuck being a night writer. A lot of moms I know who are also writers get stuck being night
Mhm.
writers or the early morning writers, because we're dodging all of these responsibilities during
Yeah.
the day, especially during COVID, when so many of us have our kids home with us.
Mhm.
Or we're, in my case, I'm sharing my office up here with my husband, who's also working from home, and a homeschooling son and two loud dogs. So like the only times I get that I'm really a quiet writer. I have to shut off everything outside of my mind in order to create. And so, because I'm really easily distracted. So I tend to write at night when the house is quiet, when my social media is quiet, when my email and my inbox are quiet, and I can have the office all to myself. So in that respect, our schedules are really, really similar. Although I tend to be a bit more organized, I think, in my approach to everything
Yeah.
than Finley, thankfully. But there, a lot of her disorganization, I think, comes from her situation and her circumstances,
Yeah.
maybe as much as it does her personality. So I try to I try to shed light on that too and be sensitive to that as well when I'm kind of exploring her character and her faults.
So the writer Ally Carter, who does really great young adult thrillers that I love, recently did a Netflix movie called A Castle for Christmas, and the character in the movie is a writer as well. And one of the things that she talked about, she said, one of the things that you see a lot in movies is, that like writing is this glamorous thing, except when it's not. So you see lots of like writer's block short story, or like writer's block storylines, and lots of like waste paper baskets with like crumbled up pieces of paper around them when they're not trying, when they can't come up with ideas. So how did you try to balance accurately reflecting kind of what an author's life is like in the book versus kind of the stuff that people just wouldn't be interested in?
Yeah, that's tough because, when you're in it, it's easy to introduce so many details that you can bog down the reader who really doesn't want to know all the inner workings of publishing. And so I find I do a lot of refinement of that during revision. Like there'll be whole passages where I'll strip away and I'll be like, yeah, that's a little bit too, that's a little bit too behind the scenes. Like no one's really going to be interested in any of that. Let's keep it to just the good stuff that really affects the plot and character. But yeah, the real trick, I mean, so much of it is real. Like there are nights when I stare at a blank screen for hours. Like that's no exaggeration. And that is an aspect of Finley that I deeply and personally connect to. There are those nights when you can stare at the manuscript and just not see the solution in front of you. And it's so frustrating, especially when you're, on a deadline and there's that added pressure of, And especially in Finley's case, when she's now a single parent, you have all those other added pressures that kind of really sort of eat away at you as you're staring at that screen. So I wanted to kind of honor those in a few of the scenes where we sort of see those very real aspects of what it could be like to be a writer. There are other parts of being a writer that we really had to weed out, or even sort of exaggerate in some ways to make them work realistically for a story that moves very fast in installments that happen very quickly in time, because writing a book and publishing a book takes forever. It can be 3 years from the time you start a book to the time it actually hits a shelf. I mean, I started the first Finley in 2018.
Oh, wow.
So, it's a process. It's a long process, and editing and revision and going through the publication process alone can take months and months and months and months. So I will completely finish a novel 9 or 10 months before it ever hits the shelf. So we can't slow down the plot to wait for those long increments. So there are a lot of things that we do take liberties with. We definitely I've trimmed down her publishing schedule to a point that it is completely unrealistic, but it has to work in order to keep the story moving forward. So in those respects, we play with it a little bit to make it work in the context of the plot.
So since you started the first book in 2018 and it came out last year in 2021, so that's like you said, it's like 3 years. Did you have to go back because things change so rapidly now with technology and slang and like pop culture and things like that? So did you have to go back in from the original manuscript and kind of tweak stuff to make it a little bit more 2021?
Not so much. I mean, COVID definitely threw up some questions about, how do we handle that? And the answer was we're just not. We're just gonna keep on rolling. And this is everyone, enjoys being in these stories now because where we are right now is no fun. And being in these stories without COVID is a lot more fun. So, we did make some decisions with that in that regard, just to kind of keep moving forward. In terms of technology and everything else, thankfully, we in the 3 years, of development time, nothing really significantly changed that would impact the plot from that standpoint. And I think in a lot of ways, like readers will let a lot of those finer details go, and so whether we're reflecting 2020 or 2024 or 2027 or whatever it is, I think as long as the reader attaches to the character and feels really grounded in the character, then there are a lot of things that as we're reading, we sort of absorb and we're good with. So thankfully, I didn't have to worry too much. In book 2, we do have quite a few social media and internet references because a lot of the mystery does take place online. So it'll be interesting to see how those age over time. But, it's in the context of sort of the general present is where we sort of leave the story.
And I have to say, as a reader, like I also appreciate the let's not address COVID. I was telling you before we went on line that I had just taken the last 2 weeks off, so I was just kind of reading some not mystery stuff, just other stuff. And I finished an autobiography of a singer, and like she put at the end, there was like an afterword. It was like, oh, and then like this and COVID happened, and because of this, it's like, oh, I was enjoying this book, and boom, there's COVID. And then I was reading a young adult fantasy, and at the end of it, they were like, oh, and after we're done on our adventure and we come back to the real world, there's this disease called COVID. I'm like, no.
All right, I'm gonna tell you, when you get to the acknowledgments at the end of book 2, if you just breeze right by them, John. Just breeze right by them.
Acknowledgments, totally fine. The end of the story, you're like, oh, we were almost there.
No, I get you all the way through the end of the story.
Perfect. So you mentioned that, a significant or a good part of the mystery for the second book does happen online. And I don't want to give spoilers away, but because there is kind of an internet forum where where Finley discovers something, what kind of research did you do into stuff like that, or even like Russian mafia hitmen? Like, what kind of research do you do, and are you able to do research into stuff like that, or are you just kind of making it up as you go?
Yeah, there's some things you just don't want to research too deeply or get too accurately, and when it comes to writing fiction about the mob, I'm sure. But, I did do, I think, more just generic internet research about the Russian mob and where they, historically speaking, some of the cases that have come up and where, where they have been most likely to operate and all of those other things. But I think in the context of a story like this, we thankfully have a lot of room to sort of wheel and play with a lot of those. So it's all, done in sort of the spirit of it. But as far as the internet research, my husband has been my biggest resource for this because he's a network engineer and he specializes in internet security. So, so it was a lot of nights where I'd tap him on the shoulder and say, "Hey, I got a question. How exactly would this work, or how can I make this work in the context of what I'm trying to achieve with this mystery?" And we'd sort of brainstorm back and forth until we sort of came to something that was viable enough that it would work within the context of the story.
Mm-hmm. When I imagine, it's not like, if you get the Russian mob stuff wrong, the Russian mob isn't going to be like, "Hey, you didn't get this right." And
Right.
if they know that you got it, you're like, it's probably better for you if you don't get it right.
Exactly. That's my thought too, is the closer I get it to the mark, probably the more dangerous that situation would be. I think as a writer, I think I'd rather get it wrong. So
Yep. So in the new book, Finley Donovan Knocks Them Dead, we learn a little bit more about Vero, and we know that she's kind of got some secrets that she's keeping to herself. Once you kind of realized that she was going to be a more integral part of the series, did you kind of plot out how much you're going to reveal for her from book to book?
Yeah, it's interesting because when we first started the series, we didn't know if it was going to be a series. I think a lot of people don't realize that the length of a series really depends on the success of the sales. And so we're sort of feeling that out book by book. And I'm super excited that we're now under contract through book 4. But
Awesome.
and that's because of the huge and amazing reception that we've had for Finley Donovan is killing it, because the early sales and the early part of the series really, really determine sort of the early success of the series really determines the length of the series, I think. And so we were very excited about that. But when I first started writing, first of all, I didn't even know if this was going to ever become a book. You kind of go into all of these things never really knowing. It's more of a leap of faith, and you write the best draft that you can and hope it will work out and that someone will buy it and the publisher will want to print it. So going into it, I honestly had no idea. And then once we sold it and we knew we had 2 books, at that point, the publisher said, "Yes, we're going to enter into a contract for 2 books." I was very, very excited for that. But we never know beyond that. If nobody liked the first book and it came out to poor sales, at that point, it could end at 2 books. We were very fortunate that the reception was so great that we've now got 2 additional books on top of that. So going into it, the long answer to the short question is I wasn't real sure how long any of the characters would be in the series. And so I didn't really know how much time we would have to explore Vero's backstory. And then in a wonderful turn of events this year, we were able to sell the TV option to yes. And so now, right away, as soon as that happened, the big question I had to answer is, who is Vero? What is her backstory, and how much of it, how do we reveal that in a way with the books that will work with the TV series if it comes to that? And so we've sort of been having some discussions about, exactly how much and how quickly do we roll out that backstory, and how exactly is it going to work. But I'm kind of exploring these characters as we're selling additional books into the series. And in book 3, we in book 2 we really start to peel away some of those layers for Vero, and then in book 3 and 4 we'll get a little bit deeper with those.
Awesome. Congratulations on the TV deal. That's exciting.
Thank you. We're excited.
Is there how far are you guys in the process of is it still kind of writing? Is there like casting happening, anything like that?
It's still very early in the development process.
Okay.
We do have a pilot script So Marlene King, who is the producer for Pretty Little Liars, is will be producing with 20th Television Studios set as the studio, and she has created a fantastic pilot script. And right now, we are in the process of casting our Finley. Once that's finished, once that process is finished, at that point, we'll go out to buyers and hope that we can find a fantastic home for the show. So if all of those things kind of fall into place, we're hoping to have a big announcement here this spring.
Very cool. So it sounds like you're kind of you get to be involved in the process.
A little bit. At this stage of the game, most of it is producer and studio. But really where my job comes in, and that's really the fun part for me, is sort of shedding light on the characters and sort of my vision for the series, and to make sure that we're all sort of working in similar directions, or directions that are at least going to be compatible as the stories go. So it's been fun for me to work with some incredibly talented people on this team, in terms of just talking about, like, where is Finley going? Where do I see the series going in print? Where do they see it going on screen? And so that's been a really fun sort of collaborative discussion. But as far as the nuts and bolts of like casting and the pilot writing and all of those things, I leave those to the people who have a lot more experience with that than I do.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like, that would also be kind of great as a writer who's kind of still early in a series, crafting it, to kind of have to think that kind of long-term stuff, even if it's just a book or two books ahead. It seems like that would probably be great to help you kind of figure out kind of where you want to go and what you want to do with stuff.
It is. And it's, I think it always helps to sort of look ahead. So I try not to write myself into too many corners. It's hard when you're, writing series not to. But it's been fun, to visualize the story becoming longer than I ever allowed to dare to dream, at the beginning of this process. So that's been fun.
Awesome. So Christine has a question in the comments. She wants to know where you got the name Finley Donovan from, because it's such a great character name.
Thank you. So a lot of people might already know from Finley Donovan is Killing It that I was with my critique partners in a real live Panera in 2018 when we first came up with sort of the idea for Finley Donovan is Killing It. We were actually talking through a plot in one of my books. I was with Megan Miranda and Ashley Elston at the time, and I was stuck in one of my YA thrillers had a magical element to it, and I was stuck with regard to a murder that would happen, and what happens with the blood, what happens with the body. Does it just magically disappear? Does somebody have to come and clean it up? And so these were some of the conversations that we were having when a woman at the table beside us overheard, and I was fairly certain that she had the wrong idea about what the context of the conversation. And so that's sort of where the whole idea came from. Well, later on that night, jumping back to the question, later on that night, we got back to our hotel room because we were retreating at the time. And I said, I have this wild idea for a story. And I think it could be really fantastic. And we started talking it through. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it might have been Megan Miranda who came up with the name Finley. And then we were just batting around names until we came up with a name that we liked the sound of. But it was that night, sitting in a hotel room over Twizzlers and adult beverages, that we were brainstorming the backstory of who is this woman, Finley Donovan? Where does she come from? And they were the ones who helped me come up with the name.
Awesome. And then, so going with the name, both of the titles for both books, Finley Donovan is Killing It and Knocks Them Dead, are also great titles. So was her name always going to be in the title, or did you have other titles in mind?
I am horrible with titles, so I did not title either of these books. My editor is the brilliant mind behind the titles of these books. So originally, fun fact, we sold the book with the working title, The Hit, and which is actually the name of Finley's book in the
Yeah.
book. So you want to go meta, there you go. But yeah, so originally my working title was The Hit, and we knew when we sold it, it wasn't going to be powerful enough to work. And so it was a sort of a big brainstorming session that went on for weeks and weeks and weeks with agents and editors and team members. And we weren't really coming up with anything. And then I got an email one day. It was from my editor. She said, "How about Finley Donovan is killing it?" And we all just sort of stopped. We're like, "That's it. This is the title of the book." It was so perfect. And then from there, it just becomes fun to kind of keep building on that. And so she knocked it out of the park again with Finlay Donovan Knocks Him Dead.
And did you have input on the covers?
No, I mean, I typically will get a chance to look at sort of the early design and give feedback. And so if there's something on it that, strikes me as something that I would be curious if they could change or might like to
Mhm.
see them change, I'll bring it up. But I also remember that that the designers and the cover artists that's their job because they're good at it. That's what they do. Like I try to I try to leave that stuff to the professionals as often as possible because they're good at it. And I honestly would not know how to design a cover myself. So I try to keep my input spare and my mind open. And I'll be honest, like the very first time I saw the Finley Donovan cover, I freaked out. I texted my critique partners and I said, it's pink. I don't know how I feel about this. Like all my books I've ever written are like very dark, like,
Mhm.
dark undertones, dark themes, dark covers, and it was so different. But, they're like, "Oh, this book is different. It's different than anything you've ever done, and it's gonna demand a different cover." And they're like, "Just go with it." And so I did, I just kind of, I sort of relaxed and it was it turned out to be the best thing that probably ever happened to this book because the cover has become iconic
Mhm.
and it really is, it's perfect.
Yeah. So since this one is so different than the stuff that you were doing before, was there any talk of you using a pseudonym for it?
No, we never really brought that up. And I don't know that I would have been opposed to the idea because I know a lot of people who do.
Mhm.
But it never really came up, and I was grateful for that. It's nice to have, I mean, Elle Cosimano is a pseudonym anyway.
Ah,
So, it's nice to have the same name on all of my book covers and to feel like I can kind of carry some of the accolades that I had garnered through
mhm.
my YA along with me. That was a nice thing. And so, I it felt good to be able to bring that with me.
So as we mentioned, the books they've got lots of humor in them. So when you're writing, is the humor coming to you as you're writing, or when you're done, do you kind of do like a humor pass when you're editing and kind of be like, oh, we could use a little bit more humor here to kind of lighten stuff up?
It's both, honestly. There's some scenes where the humor comes and yeah, those I'm very thankful for. If I ever sit down to write a scene and the humor just comes, that's a great thing and I'm grateful every time. But it's not always that way. And we have to, I have to push through deadlines regardless of what other stresses or things I have going on in my life or, COVID or deadlines or, you know, um, you know, family things or whatever it is that we have going on, my head's not always the funny place. So,
Yeah.
sometimes those first drafts are just getting the scene down or just getting the plot down. And I'll have to go back and I'll say, yeah, we sort of lost the tone of the book here.
Mhm.
And I've got to go back and figure out, really maybe that's where my head was in that moment, but where would Finley and Vero's head be in that moment? And I've got to go back and take another pass through and edit for those kinds of things.
Yeah. Because I imagine it's got to be tricky to find that balance because you want it to be, light and humorous, but you're also trying to solve a mystery and you also want it to be fast paced. So I imagine kind of trying to get all of those beats together is tricky.
Really hard.
Yeah.
And, my first drafts are messy, really, really messy. And I do the lion's share of my writing during revision. So, I can get 70% into a draft and not entirely know what my themes are or where I want to go with, the end of the book, or there might be lots and lots of messiness along the way. And really, I go back through and make many, many passes over the existing manuscript for lots of things. So I might go make a pass for humor. I might make a pass for pacing and weeding, because that's so important in humor anyway, whether it's humor or thriller, pacing is critical.
Yeah.
And so I might go back and do a pass just for romantic elements. I might go do a pass for logic and plot holes. Like by the time I'm done, I've probably gone through that manuscript 20 million times. I always know I'm finished. I've really finished when I'm sick of looking at it.
So Katie wants to know, she says, as an adult and young adult author, do you find it hard to switch your writing styles and get in different mode for the target audiences?
I don't really switch my writing styles remarkably. For me, I think the biggest difference here is the tone of the overall book, but that's not because of the intended audience. I would actually say kind of the opposite is true. My YA tends to read heavier, in some cases more sophisticated, longer, thematically very deep sort of reads. And so I think really I'm picking tone, I'm picking writing style, I'm picking voice, not for the age of my protagonist, but for the voice of the protagonist and the voice of the story that fits this book. And for me, writing about and for young adults is really not that different than writing about and for grown-ups. It's just the lens of life experience that my narrator is telling the story through. And so, yeah, it's for me, the process is exactly the same. It's finding the right voice for that book, regardless of who's narrating.
Are you still doing YA, or are you taking a little bit of a break from it while you're concentrating on these?
Finley is requiring a lot of time and energy. So I'm taking a little break right now. We just put out in June the second of the Seasons of the Storm duology. So Seasons of Chaos, that duology is now finished, and I have my hands full with Finley and Vero right now. So I have a lot of YA stories left in me. I still love it. It's, it holds a big piece of my heart. And so I don't never say never. I'm sure I will at some point write another young adult novel. But for now, Finley is 100% of my time and energy, and I am delighted by that. So yeah, we have a lot of work ahead of us, Finley and I.
Awesome. Can you tell everybody just real quick what kind of the elevator pitch for the Seasons of the Storm series?
Sure. Yeah, Seasons of the Storm is really fun. It is I would call it a YA dark fantasy. You might even call it an urban fantasy. It's set in a contemporary world, our own world, but it is the story of the seasons are personified. Winter, spring, summer, and fall are young adults who have in the course of dying for whatever traumatic event happened to them in their real life, were given a second chance in order they could come back as the embodiment of a season. And the rules of the game the rules of the universe are that each season has to kill the season before it in order to take their rightful place in during the course of the year and have their time on Earth, and which is all well and good until Jack, a winter, falls in love with his spring, and she has to kill him every year. And so when the two of them fall in love, they decide to rebel against the system of the natural order that they're now living in. And so it's sort of an adventure. I call it a sort of a fantasy road trip. But it's a lot of action and sort of fantastical elements, but it does take place sort of in a modern world. It's a really cool sort of mashup.
Awesome. Perfect. And then so if anyone's interested in those, the first in the series is Seasons of the Storm, and then, as she said, the second one is Seasons of Chaos. But so back to Finley, one of the things that you also do really well is, in both books, Finley is still kind of going through the process of divorce. So she's having to deal with the feelings of this ex-husband who, like you said, has left her for her realtor. But at the same time, she's also trying to protect him for his sake and the sake of her children. So how do you balance those kind of conflicting emotions for that character?
Yeah, I think, relationships in general they're always going to be about conflict. And in this case, the conflict here it's very easy to keep balance because it feels so natural that there would be the conflict of, I really, really resent this man who has hurt me so deeply. And yet he's a good father to my children. And I want to preserve, whatever kind of co-parenting sort of relationship I can have with this man in order for my children to be happy. And so I think as a parent, I've never experienced divorce. Thankfully, I've been there for friends and supported friends through it who have been through it. But I think really what I'm doing with these characters is exploring betrayal and loss and the fear that comes with the massive life upheaval that comes from that. But I'm, as a parent, as a mom, I understand and relate deeply to the natural desire to protect your child and how strong that is, and that can be just as powerful, if not more powerful, than the urge to let somebody else, get rid of him because he was horrible, So I found it easy to keep that balance as long as I remembered who she was as a mother.
So Christine wants to know, do your family members read your books?
Yes, some. My mom, I think, has probably read all of my books. And my husband's read a few of them. My kids, no, they've never read any of my books. And I have, and if you read the first book, then you remember the Great Aunt Florrie and her table linens. I have a Great Aunt Florrie who reads all of my books religiously. So she's probably my number one cheerleader.
Perfect. So which one was harder to write? Finlay Donovan is Killing It or the new one Knocks Him Dead? Is it easier to start over with a complete new world, or is it harder to kind of take that world and have to expand it?
Really good question. For me, the second book was much, much harder. And I don't think it's a function of the world or the characters or the plot. I think it's a function of expectation and external voices. So when I'm drafting a first book, often those books aren't even sold yet, or no one's ever seen them before. There's a lot of creative freedom in that. There's a lot of freedom to make mistakes. There's time. If the book isn't under contract, there's no deadline, and there's much less pressure. And I can just be alone in that world with these characters, messing it up as much as I like, until I'm happy with it. But when we're talking about series and you're talking about a subsequent book, especially a series where the second book comes after a very, very beloved first book, there are expectations and deadlines and the reviews and readers they have very strong opinions about, where they want the story to go and how quickly they want it to get to them, And so there is a lot of external pressure that can sort of weigh down the creative process. It makes it hard, it makes it hard to silence all of the reviews and the feedback coming from all those different directions and just be alone in your head with your characters.
And how do you deal with that? Is that where like a critique group and like writers that are friends come in handy to kind of be able to help kind of process that for you?
Yeah, I mean, they're vital to my process. If for no other reason, sometimes just to vent and to unload some of those fears and worries. Imposter syndrome, we all get imposter syndrome. I don't care how many books you've written and put out. And it's really been amazing for me to have this group of other writers who understand all of those stresses and fears, and will be a soundboard for them as I would for them, just to have that support network along the way. We're not always just critiquing or brainstorming or coming up with plot solutions. Sometimes we're just being there for each other and supporting each other. And so, when I'm behind deadline and the plot's not coming together and I'm terrified of, a book, I can call them and say, I'm terrified of this book. I don't want to finish it. Somebody else needs to finish this book. And they'll say, now come on, get your butt in gear, go write a book. And sometimes we need that swift kick in the pants from someone that we love and trust who's been there.
Yeah, it's always also fun to just, be able to commiserate with people. Like I, bookseller friends who work at other stores, and like sometimes like weird things will happen, whether it's a weird customer interaction or like a weird publishing thing, just to be able to like text somebody and like, okay, this thing just happened. Am I crazy? Is this weird? What's going on here? It's nice to have those people to be able to like talk you off a ledge sometimes. You're like, no, this is weird. You're not insane.
Exactly. And people who understand, that they've been there, they walked in your shoes, they know where you're coming from. Yeah.
So you mentioned early when we were chatting that you were a fan of Janet Ivanovich. Who are some of the other authors that you like, or who are some of the ones that kind of, helped form what you wanted to write and you as a reader?
Oh my gosh. There's so many, because and you probably get this just looking at Finley. Finley's a really eclectic story. She doesn't fit on any particular shelf cleanly. And that was really tricky when we first went to sell the book, because we weren't really sure entirely what kind of book we were selling. We knew it was a mystery. But it also has some elements of women's fiction in it. It has elements of comedy and dark comedy in it. It has cozy elements in it, but it's a little bit edgier than your typical cozy. There are definitely some thriller elements in there. There's some sort of edgier scenes. We weren't real sure, how to categorize this book. And I think that's a reflection of my own personal tastes too. One of the reasons I loved and still love reading and writing YA is because the genre bending is so fluid and flexible. There's no real hard, fast rules, and you can mash up lots of different things. Seasons of the Storm is another great example where I took, sci-fi and fantasy and urban and contemporary and road trip adventure and sort of mashed them all up with romance, and there you go. And I love that. And I think that's a reflection of my reading tastes too. So my influences were always all over the map. I could go from, reading something light and rompy and loving a Janet Ivanovich, Stephanie Plum book, to going into, YA paranormal or adult fantasy or, romance, straight up contemporary romance or dark thrillers. They were sort of all over the map. And so my influences sort of came from everywhere. But, if you wanted to look at like another mystery author who I think just does this phenomenal job with really voicey mysteries that sort of incorporate lots of different elements to them. Dorinda Jones is another favorite. She's so fantastic, and I love her books. Charlaine Harris, she's just amazing. It's the same kind of thing where you've got this fantastic mashup of different things going on that just work together. And those are really kind of the books that I most enjoy, reading too.
Yeah, it's been really great to see kind of readers start to embrace kind of that more genre bending stuff. And I have to wonder if some of that is because, the readers that, started reading or the kids that started reading like Harry Potter and Twilight that like opened up like worlds to them, or like now getting to the point where they're adults and they're picking up their own stuff. So it's really great to see that people are taking a little bit more risks in what they read, and it doesn't necessarily have to fall into kind of one genre box.
I love that because I think it helps people to discover other things that they may not have realized they were interested in. And so it's fun to see people try books, whether they be YA mashups, or now we're starting to see, I think, a few more of those adult mashups happening. And I hear it all the time. Wow, I didn't really know that I liked mysteries, but I could do this. This is really interesting. And so it's sort of they're sort of dipping their feet in something without realizing that they're trying something new.
So what's something that you've read lately that you loved?
Oh my gosh. So many things right now. Right now, I'm reading a lot of manuscripts. So, but there's so many books on my TBR pile that I'm really excited about. And I actually brought some of them to show. So, for the YA set, loving Kara Thomas, and That Weekend. Her books are fantastic, and she's got such great voice for thriller. They're very mature, they're very sophisticated, dark, and delicious. Love them. Another kind of in the same vein, Andrea Contos is one of my all-time favorites. She's amazing, and she's got another book coming. But Throwaway Girls won the Throwaway Girls won the International Thriller Award last year, for good reason. It is super. And so if you're a reader of adult thrillers and wanted to see what's on the table for YA, these are great. For adult books, Hello Transcriber, I'm enjoying now. It's got one of the darkest scenes that's like creeped me out, is awesome. So, love it. Love. I do love myself a dark book, and these are great. One that there are two that just came out that are on my TBR. So as soon as this manuscript is finished and I'm done reading these manuscripts that I have on my desk, these are two in my TBR that I'm really excited to get sink my teeth into. So A Flicker in the Dark, that cover is just fantastic. I love that. And speaking of great covers, I mean, how cool is that? So Eliza Jane Brazier and Good Rich People, that just looks really intriguing. And then in something kind of a lighter vein, more like Finley, I am enjoying an audio right now, Cherie Priest, Grave Reservations.
So much fun. So much fun.
It's a great, fun book, and the narrator's fantastic. So if you like audio, that's definitely a great one for audio. Dorinda Jones, Bad Day for Sunshine and a Good Day for Chardonnay are sort of in a similar mood and vein as Finley. Those are really fun. And I'm dying to sink my teeth into Arsenic and Adobo by Mia P. Manansala, because that one's just done so well in terms of accolades and recognition, and I hear so many wonderful things about it. So I'm really excited to read that one too.
It's great. We're actually going to be chatting with Mia on, she's going to be chatting with Kelly Garrett. I'm just pulling up the date right now, next Friday, February 11th. So the second book in the series comes out. And she's actually watching. She was mentioning that the Eliza Jane Brazier is so good too. So yeah, so guys, come check us out next week.
And Kelly, and while you're on the subject of Kelly Garrett, Like a Sister, I think it's March 8th. I think it's March 8th is the date that's in my head. That was really, really good. Really good book. I loved it. So definitely put that one on your radar.
Yeah, I just brought the galley of Kelly's home with me today. And as we mentioned, the Sherry Priest is so much fun. We had a customer come in one day and picked it up, and we're like, oh, this is such a good read-alike for the Elle Cosimano, and I was like, oh, it totally is. I hadn't thought about that. So, and which is fine because Sherry also did young adult and did fantasy stuff, but she also did kind of like really dark stuff. So this was sort of kind of a completely different kind of book for her, and so much fun.
Yep, absolutely. And I think authors who have that experience too with kind of pacey thrillers or pacey fantasies, I've seen it become very successful going into rompy comedies because the pacing is such a big element in kind of creating those. Ashley Elston is a really good example. She went from dark YA thrillers to 10 Blind Dates, which was just a super fun. I mean, that was just a great romantic comedy. Loved that book.
And so you mentioned you're working on Finley #3 now. Awesome. And
yep, we are busy drafting, and I believe that one's going to come out exactly the same time next year.
Nice.
So we should be a year almost to the day.
Awesome. So for anyone who is curious about any of the books that Elle was holding up that she was excited about, I dropped links for those in the comments and the live chat on Facebook and YouTube. So we've got most of them in store, or if not having them immediately, we can get them pretty soon if you want to order them from us. As I mentioned, we do have signed copies of the new one, Finlay Donovan Knocks Dead. So if you've not gotten your copy yet, or you want a signed copy, we've got them here with Murder by the Book. Elle, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I was bummed that I didn't get to chat with you when the first book came out, but I'm so glad I got to chat with you tonight.
It was great being here. Thanks to everyone for reading and for all the warm wishes today for publication day. It was super fun.
And we will keep our fingers crossed that next year when the third one comes out, we'll actually get to see you in store and get to do this in person.
That would be great. That would be wonderful. Fingers crossed.
Take care. Have a good night. Congrats again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.